Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Today, it's our pleasure to welcome back to the show my guy, Mitch Tischler, of course, the Beltway Football Podcast. Mitchell, how are you, my friend? Good to talk to you for the second time today. This time, it's not raining.
It's not raining outside. Did you get a chance to get home and put on some dry clothes, or are you sitting there in the studio freezing your butt off wet?
No, I am doing the show from home today because I was like, I'm going home to change, and if I have time to get into the studio, great, and if not, I have fancy microphones and cameras and lights in my home, and that is the choice that I've made.
For what it's worth, I have lots of fancy lights, cameras, and microphones in my home as well.
Yeah, I mean, they're great. We've done shows where you've been on camera with us, and it looks amazing and sounds great. So I can confirm. But, Mitchell, as we stood there in the rain, nobody cared about our soaking wet clothes or our general well-being. No, they want to know about the football. This is our first chance to see a full team practice under Dan Quinn as you and JP and everybody else walked away from Ashburn today. What's the thought that sticks out the most for you?
Actually, I mean, there are a couple. I think in the non-Jayden Daniels division, which I think deserves its own discussion, was the fact that this was a voluntary OTA and just about every single player was there. And I think that says a lot to what Dan Quinn and ultimately Adam Peters were trying to build here. And on top of them all being here, folks were bought in. You know, they do this fun little drill at the beginning of practice to get energy going. And you see Cliff Kingsbury, who had on the big, big brim, I guess, almost sombrero hat right in the middle there, kind of getting the guys going. And he talked about afterwards how much he loved that drill and how much juice it brought to the practice field. And you saw guys from the very get-go of practice be moving quick, moving fast, and getting through drills. And it was a joy to see some real football on the field today.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it was really cool to see that juice, that energy. You see a number of interceptions, which we can talk about, of course, and the energy of the defensive guys, especially on those. But when you see that, kind of the structure of practice from the double-barreled 7-on-7s to whatever, is it the kind of thing that you're just like, oh, this is different, or would you say, like, this is better? Is it different in a way that matters in a positive way in terms of the structure and all that kind of stuff?
You know, it's interesting. I think that when Ron Rivera was here, I think the structure was relatively similar in terms of trying to get as many reps in as possible. But I think the speed with which things ran today was better and kind of more effective. You saw guys go from, quarterbacks throwing to coaches, quarterbacks then throwing to receivers, quarterbacks then throwing to receivers along the way. And when the running backs left the quarterbacks, they went and did their own sort of blocking/catching drills with the tight ends. And I just think you kind of saw there wasn't a ton of time where the guys were set with their individual groups. They were spending times with kind of two groups would be together, working together on, kind of duo type things. And I think that goes a long way towards kind of ingratiating everyone, on the team, and also kind of getting collaborative effort from coaching staff, from the coaches and the players as well on the field.
Mitch Tischler, of course, the co-host of the Beltway Football Podcast, is with us here on the Hoffman Show. So you mentioned Jayden Daniels deserves his own section. We have now reached the Jayden Daniels section of the program. He's definitively QB2 for whatever that's worth on a day where there's equal number of reps between QB2 and QB1. It's just Marcus Mariota went first, and he got to throw to Terry and all those guys. And who knows, when we're not there tomorrow, that could flip, and maybe they'll even flip it in front of us for the media next week. But in terms of how Jayden actually looked, what stood out to you? I guess if you were at rookie minicamp, your second time getting to see him throw in person, but first time getting to see all that with the full group of veterans around him.
Yeah, I mean, I think first to start with Jayden being QB2, across the board you saw clearly Dan Quinn is going to make these rookies earn it. None of the rookies were working with their number one group there. They all were kind of working in the 2s, 3s, and or 4s along the way. And I think that's just a an old school football mindset where no one's given anything. But as far as watching Jayden Daniels, I think the most impressive thing is just kind of his ball placement and it being kind of in the right place at the right time for his different receivers. Going back the past couple seasons, whether it was Sam Howell or it was Ryan Fitzpatrick or Carson Wentz, you saw the ball on the ground a lot early on in camp. And that was both in OTAs and in mini camp and then ultimately into training camp. And the different quarterbacks talked about different reasons, that it was happening, whether it was getting a feel for the receivers or watching receivers run the ball, run different routes, different ways, and kind of, needing to understand everything that happens. You realize kind of the malarkey of those kinds of, excuses as you watch a rookie in Jayden Daniels work with his wide receivers ostensibly for the first time and being able to complete the ball at a regular clip with them. And then when you start looking at him getting into the 7-on-7 drills, there are a couple throws that just really stood out to me. One was on the left side. He threw a perfect back shoulder ball to, who was it? It was to Dax Milne, who went up and he ended up bobbling it and kind of catching it on the ground when he was out of bounds. But the ball was just, high and away from the receiver and in a position where only his guy was going to get it. No one else was. There was another ball on the right side of the field where he kind of had a mini scramble out of the pocket. And I believe it was Bryson Tremaine was working back to kind of give him a look. And he just fired a ball to the sideline, again, high into the outside where only Bryson would have been able to make the play there. And it's just, it's little things like that where you see him put the ball in the right place where, it's either his guy or nobody, or if he's throwing kind of the slants or the ins or whatever kind of route these guys are running, they're catching it in stride with the ability to go and make plays on the back end. And that's an important thing. And it's not something that we've seen from the quarterbacks here in Washington, even though it's minicamp or OTAs and you should only take so much away from it. The fact that it's happening now bodes well to it happening on Sundays as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think it's also a credit. And again, this is in addition to, this is not taking anything away from Jayden, but it's a credit to Cliff. It really seems like they have a good understanding of what these guys can stomach. And Dan was actually asked about this before practice in terms of how do you know if you put too much on a guy's plate? And Dan's you just give him the reps and it becomes pretty self-evident. But it seems like, Mitch, there's not a lot of pre-snap confusion and, their execution level's pretty high offensively. It seems like they've really kind of tempoed the amount of information that they've given these guys really well. And it's different than last year where it seems like EB was screaming his head off every 5 seconds at someone for screwing something up. And while it was really fun for us at the time to be oh, look at the intensity of Eric Bieniemy, it turned out guys not knowing what to do was a sign of things to come.
And I think that you saw last year, the enthusiasm came from the coaching staff. I think this year you're seeing the enthusiasm come from within, being more intrinsic for these players. But Cliff Kingsbury talked afterwards about kind of trying to step Jayden through the process and not put too much on his plate. And to me, especially being, a guy who loves O-line play and all that, what I loved hearing Cliff Kingsbury talk about was how far ahead of the game Jayden was in figuring out protections. And that's such a big step, and to me, shows so much maturity from the quarterback, because it's not something that shows up on the stat sheets necessarily on Sundays, being able to put your linemen in the right position, but having the maturity and the dedication to understand the importance of learning that early on in the playbook so that he can work, more collaboratively, closely with Tyler Biadasz and whoever else ends up playing center on the offensive line, speaks to why they went after, why they drafted a guy like Jayden. Because even when Carson was here, and, last year Sam Howell clearly had issues, figuring out the protections, those quarterbacks relied so much on the centers to set the O-line and set the blocking schemes. And ultimately, I think we saw with the, time to throw for both of those quarterbacks, that didn't really work particularly well because, sometimes you had the quarterbacks thinking one thing and the line thinking another. And so I was super impressed with that from Jayden. Hearing him talk last week, watching him on the field here, you're seeing a mature young man and a guy who I think is mature beyond his years when it comes to being a quarterback. And, you hope that all of that, translates to Sundays, when it's important. But I think he's showing you that he's putting the building blocks in the right place. And, kind of not worried about figuring out when he's going to throw the 9 ball, figuring out how he's going to get time so he can ultimately read a defense and get to the 9 ball. And I think that goes a long way.
Mitch Tischler, co-host of the Beltway Football Podcast, with us. More on Daniels in a second. But since you mentioned O-line, and obviously those guys left the field early today, so there's not a lot to talk about there. But did you see Allegretti sprint into field goal?
Right. I mean, I think that
that was amazing.
You saw Bobby Wagner coming out of that pre-practice drill, sprinting over to the practice field. Bobby Wagner has been in the league forever. He's a Hall of Famer. He doesn't need to do any of this. But the fact that he is doing it shows you that. And, you can't read a whole lot on O-line, just going back to Allegretti and Biotish and, Cosmi and ultimately Brandon Coleman and all those guys. They're in shorts and a T-shirt. You can get a feel for how their footwork is, their quickness, body style, stuff like that. But until they get to those one-on-ones in minicamp or training camp, where they're, going one-on-one against that D-line, that's when you'll really get a feel for it. But I will say just, I felt better looking at Nick Allegretti, Tyler Biotish, and Sam Cosmi being kind of the inside 3 for that O-line. And ultimately, Cosmi, after practice, talked about kind of the collaborative discussions that they're having, and that's been a theme across the offense is the collaboration. But, Sam mentioned that you bring in guys like Allegretti and Biotish and even Dieter, who are, more veteran NFL players. They've kind of been there, done that. They can discuss, hey, this is the best way that I like to attack, a double team where I have to rub off and get to a linebacker. This is what I need from you when I'm doing X, Y, or Z. And I think you're just seeing, as opposed to guys learning together on the fly, you're seeing guys who have a strong base knowledge and have a kind of a basement floor, that we know what they can be. And hopefully as a group, they can meld and gel and get together and be a more cohesive offensive line.
I mean, that's like great real analysis, Mitch. I just enjoyed watching Allegretti act like a gigantic child. That's really all I was talking about. The fact that he ran down the field. Full speed.
I love Nick Gates last year for all that. Nick Gates was the king of energy and, blocking through the whistle and getting a cheap block as the guy's trying to get into the end zone.
Yeah.
And all that stuff is awesome. And, you love to see it because I want my O-linemen to be, the energy bringers. I want them to be gritty. I want them to be the guys that are going around headbutting everybody, a la Trent Williams when, he was leading that offensive line when he was here. But ultimately, we need solid pass pro and,
yes,
guys who are dogs in the run game. And I think we have a lot more of that on this offensive line than we've had in years past.
Yeah, joy between the whistles, or like before the whistle, dog when set hut happens. That's what we're looking for. Mitch Tischler with us, Beltway Football Podcast. Check it out anywhere you get your pods. Daniels looked to have a pretty clean day. I think he might have thrown one. It was hard to watch because there was 7-on-7 happening on both sides. Marcus Mariota, on the other hand, must have thrown 3 or 4 picks. Are you like, oh boy, or are you like, hey, that's that defense we heard about as you watch Jeremy Chin get a pick and a couple of other guys obviously come down with balls wearing burgundy jerseys today on the defensive side on the ones versus one side of the field?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone who has a kind of realistic view of this quarterback situation knows what's ultimately going to happen, come whatever it is, the September 12th first game of the season. Marcus Mariota is gonna do that. There were a couple plays that I think were on the quarterback and a couple that were on the defense, kind of making really good plays. You mentioned the Jeremy Chin pick. That was a really nice play by him to step in front of, I believe it was Jahan over there. I'm not sure, but I think that ultimately we're going to have to, take what we see out of Marcus Mariota with a grain of salt, because if things go as planned, he won't see the field one time this season.
No, yes, 100%. And it's like, yep, he's QB1 for right now, but talk to me in August when these things actually matter. Anything else in particular that you really either want to follow up on or that you want to see that you didn't see today outside of O-line, D-line work when we, keep returning to Ashburn once a week over the course of the next month? Like what's after you've gotten this taste, like what's on the to-do list now for you?
Well, one other standout from today before I kind of get to that was Luke McCaffrey. And
Yeah.
I guess
a big long
no
touchdown
one
amongst
should
other
be surprised
things.
by it. He's just such a veteran. He looks like an old vet on the field, and he looks like a guy who's been around football since he was 3 years old. And obviously, between his father and his brother, he has been, but he looks like he belongs. And I think that he could be a real integral part of this passing game, because I think he frees up Jahan Dotson a lot to run more on the outside, and garners a lot more attention over the middle than some of the guys that we've seen run there. And I hope that it continues as we go. To me, the biggest thing is today was the first day of OTAs. It's easy to get all the buy-in from all the players and have folks excited about being on the practice field and, seeing them bring the juice and do all the little things. I want to kind of continue to see that happen as, the off season continues. And ultimately, one thing I loved today was Sam Cosmi talked about, there was one play where before the play even started, he had Bobby Wagner calling out. He's like, "Hey, guard's going to pull." And Sam said, like, in my head, I was actively trying to not show off that I was doing that. And he loved the fact that after the play, he was able to go over to Bobby, and Bobby was like, "Hey man, this is what I saw. This is how I knew." And I think I want to see that kind of continue to expand. I want to see some of these vets really take these young guys under their arms. It's kind of a cliche thing to say, but that was just a huge piece that I think has been missing from this Commanders organization, and that's kind of the player-led leadership. John Allen kind of took that over by default, but that's not really the kind of guy that he is. That's not what he really wants to be doing per se in the locker room in terms of being the vocal leader. And I think bringing in a bunch of these vets that they have, between Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner, and even when you start going down the rest of the defense, I think that all will go a really long way in terms of helping to build the camaraderie, but also helping, control the, I would say, in-house shenanigans that we've seen on the field, sometimes having those guys be able to step up and be leaders.
No, I think that's a great point, and to see how they continue to bring that energy. But you go back to where some of this comes from. It's Pete Carroll's school, if you will, and obviously DQ and Bobby were there together. Like, they know that it works. They've won a championship doing it this way, and it's cool to see it carry over. And kind of the blends of coaching styles too, the efficiency of Cliff, the energy of DQ, the intensity of Joe Witt. You see it all come together, and as long as that concoction stays stable, then it's a good thing to watch for going forward. Mitch Tischler with us here on the Hoffman Show. You can check out the Beltway Football Podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Mitch, always great to chat. Thanks for your time. Always great to see you, and I guess I'll see you in Ashburn again next week.
Looking forward to it. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. That is Mitch Tischler with us here on the Hoffman Show. Just a real quick follow-up story that I think DQ told last week. I'm now not remembering where this is from, but I'm pretty sure it's from Dan Quinn in an interview he did, or maybe this is from Commander's Log or something. But they had their first big team meeting, and offense sits together, defense sits together. And Dan apparently was like, nah, every offensive guy sits next to a defensive guy. Every defensive guy sits next to an offensive guy. And that way they get to know each other. And when Mitch tells or relays that story that Sam Cosmi told after practice about how Bobby Wagner was able to read something off of him, and then Sam goes after the play to Bobby and is like, what did you see? How did you know? That's big time. To have that relationship already built in. Those are two of your team leaders. They should know each other. They should be comfortable talking. And it's just these little things that matter over the course of a season, because the little things stack up and become big things. If you fix Sam Cosmi's stance, maybe a key play at some point on a big third down or a big second down that avoids a big third down because you get a first down running the football that Sam Cosmi doesn't tip. That could win you a game, and nobody ever knows. Sam Cosmi probably doesn't even know. This happens in November, and he just is in a better stance because of what happened in May, and Bobby Wagner and he having that relationship to talk about it. These are the little things that are impossible to quantify that matter in a major way in the NFL, where the margins are so small. And so to take every step to try to make sure that your team is as close as possible, that they're helping each other as much as possible, is the kind of thing that you just love to hear because it's heartening, but it also matters in terms of the results. And so, a cool story from Cosmi today. Appreciate Mitch relaying it from after practice. Mitch Tischler, Beltway Football Podcast, available wherever you get yours.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.